Axon Server is configurable, and there are many configuration properties you can use to configure Axon Server. And in this video lesson, I'll show you how to configure just a few and basic properties, and a link to a complete list of configuration properties I'll share with you in the following video lesson. Axon Server is highly configurable, and I will not be demonstrating how each and every configuration property works. So this is something that you will need to explore additionally on your own. And here's a complete list of Axon Server configuration properties organized by different areas. Node setup, and if you scroll down, there'll be file location section, and so on. So the list of configuration properties is quite long. You can scroll up and down this configuration properties list to see what can be done, and to do that you might want to pause the video and then resume and continue watching this video lesson. Alright, so each of these configuration properties needs to be prefixed with Axonic Axon Server prefix. And I assume this is to make this table better readable. The prefix for each configuration property was removed. So let's say we want to use hostname configuration property, and to use this property we will need to first use the prefix, which is axonic.axonserver, and then put dot and then continue with the property name. And we need to use this prefix for almost all the properties in this table except just a few. For example, if we want to configure HTTP port number on which our Axon server is running, then we do not need to use prefix. And this is mentioned in the documentation here. For the server port, there should be no prefix used. And if you scroll through the list of these properties, you'll find that there are other properties that should not use prefix. Alright, so let's see what we need to do to configure Axon Server to use a different port number, for example. And to configure Axon Server, we'll need to create a new configuration property file either directly in Axon Server folder or in a subfolder. And I will go to a project folder where I have my Axon Server installed. I have it in this folder, Axon Secure Saga video course, and here's my Axon Server folder, which I have downloaded from Axon website. So I'll create a new subfolder here called config, and inside of that config folder, I'll create a new configuration file called Axon Server properties. So let's do that. I'll first create a config folder, and to create a new configuration file, I will use text editor, and here in this text editor, I will provide configuration, let's say server port, and then I will save this configuration file in my folder. So again, my Axon Server is inside of Axon Secure Saga video course folder. Then I will select Axon Server folder. Then I'll select config folder. And here I'll need to provide a file name, which should be axonserver.properties. And if you prefer to use YAML format, then you can create a file called axonserver.yaml instead. And you can actually have both files. You can have axonserver.properties and you can have axonserver.yaml file, and Axon Server should detect both files. Okay, so I will call my file axonserver.properties and I will save it in a config folder. And here in this file, just like in a regular Spring Boot application, I can configure port number, server.port equals, and by default Axon Server starts on port 80 and 24, and if I want to start it on a different port number, I can provide a different value here, for example 80 and 25. So I can save this configuration properties file and then go back to Safari and pick one more property to configure. For example, let's configure Axon Server name, and for this property I will need to use the prefix, so I will copy it, Axonic Axon Server prefix from here, and I will paste it into my configuration property first. Then I will need to add dot and the name of the property, which is just name, and I will call my Axon Server just my Axon Server, something like this. Okay, so let's go back and pick one more, for example, host name. I'll go back to my configuration properties, paste the property name, then I will copy the prefix, paste it here, and then equals. I'm running Axon Server locally on my computer, so the host name will be localhost. Another very useful configuration property that I also like to configure for development purposes is to enable Axon Server to start up in a development mode. And this will enable a reset button in Axon Server dashboard, and you can use this button to reset or clear the event store storage. So the configuration property will start with the prefix and then dot and then dev mode dot enabled equals true. All right. So now I will save my configuration file and I will start up Axon Server. So I will bring in terminal window. Right now I'm in Axon Server folder, so I can list files here and I should see the config folder that I have just created. And I will start Axon Server with Java jar and then Axon Server jar. And here we go. I see that the Tomcat has initialized with port 80 and 25 now. Let's have a look at Axon Server dashboard. And this time I'll need to use localhost port number 8025. And here's my dashboard. And I see that Axon Server name has also changed. It is now called My Axon Server. The port number is 80 and 25. And I see that the Reset Event Store button is also now here. And this button will not be here if you do not enable the dev mode. Alright, so we will come back to this configuration file one more time during this video course, but in this video course I will not cover much of Axon Server configuration properties. Many of them are outside of the scope of this video course.